Speaking of which, this is a good segue, I'll have you know, to a question that it was a long email that I got. I've been looking through the emails again. That's dangerous. And I won't berate the fellow, because it sounded like he's a more recent fan that has read on the internet how wrestling is done and has some misapprehensions or misimpressions or whatever. And it is kind of a long email, but basically the question was, why do you and I, Brian, why do we criticize matches when we criticize the matches not for the wrestler's work, I guess actually execution of the moves or whatever, the wrestler's work, but for the logic or continuity, or we say this match didn't make sense, or why would you do this and that? And the guy basically said, isn't that the way the booker would have booked it? So how could it be the wrestler's fault? And I'm not going to say that there's no place now in the world of wrestling or in some independent promotion or, you know, the guys that run their hometown on their birthday where they don't, when they write down, I want Ben to wrestle Joe, they don't actually write the match that they want them to have out and pitch it to them. Or maybe Ben's the booker too and the promoter and he and Joe, maybe that might happen. But for the most part, and I don't know what they're doing over with the booking, I bet Tony Khan, the way he does a media scrum or a media call, he might very well sit down and write out wrestling matches move for move. He might have the time and energy for that. I don't understand how.
I don't think he's gone that far.
Who knows? Well, maybe he just doesn't show them to anybody yet. He's waiting to see whether the other guys can do it right. But anyway, the way that a booker or the interaction that a booker would have in the actual match with the wrestlers, I will try to, as clearly and succinctly as possible, explain what it would have been like in the wrestling business, basically from the time that they invented doing finishes to, I don't know, what, 15 or 20 years ago when the world went mad, as our friend Einar said. And that is basically that the booker is the person who not only, as we've mentioned before, hires the wrestling talent. He's in charge of the roster. If you're the booker of Florida wrestling or Georgia wrestling or New Jersey wrestling, then you've brought the wrestlers in that you want to use on the cards. That's your decision. And you also decide on the live events which one of those wrestlers wrestle each other. You make the matches. It's Joe versus Tom and Dick versus Harry and whatever the case. And as the booker, you also decide who's going to win those matches and how in terms of pinfall, disqualification, count out, whatever. And also, as the booker, especially a good one, and now is where we're going to start getting into variables. Almost every booker in the history of bookers would do all the things that I just talked about and format the television show, same as live events. Here's who's going to wrestle who, and here's who's going to talk. The booker anywhere would do all of those things. Then bookers would, depending on the talent involved and or the match, would then give you most of the time a specific finish. Sometimes, if the booker is talking to one of the biggest stars in wrestling and it's a TV match or whatever, he'll just say, okay, you're going over whatever. We'll talk about that in a second. But if, let's say we're talking about house show matches here, that used to be the most important thing, not television. So the house show matches, the booker, if he was also a wrestler on the card, might not be able to come in to the other side's locker room. If he was a heel, he wouldn't be able to come in the babyface locker room or vice versa, not just because of kayfabe, but sometimes because of the layout of the building. Can't get there from here without going through the people and them seeing you. So that's where the finish would be carried by one of the referees or an assistant booker or somebody that could pass around easily. And basically, as I said, past telling you who was going to win, if he was going to give you a specific finish, he would give you literally the finish. And it would sound something like, okay, if it's the Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnight Express, he'd be telling the Midnight Express, okay, shine him up and then cut Ricky off and get some heat. Now you've just cut the first 10 minutes of the match down to shine him up or shine him up and cut Ricky off and get some heat. It's implied that the wrestlers are going to go out and the heels are going to shine the baby faces. They're going to make them look good. They're going to put them over. They're going to make them look like they're world beaters. And then Ricky Morton is the one we're going to cut off with a heel fucking cutoff move. Something behind the referee's back or double team or insidious or not exactly according to Hoyle. And we're going to get some heat on Ricky. So, shine him up, cut Ricky off, get some heat on him, give Hoot the tag. That means after the heat, which is going to take another 5 or 10 minutes, that's up to the boys. They're going to kick the shit out of Ricky. He's going to sell and fight back and try to tag. And he's going to get the people behind him in that endeavor. And there's going to be a couple times where he almost makes it, but not quite. So they're almost ready to fucking blow. And that's where, and give Hoot the hot tag comes in. Ricky's going to make the hot tag out of nowhere to Robert Gibson. Come back. Finally hit a false finish. That means Robert's going to make a comeback. And the heels are going to bump for him as long as the people are screaming. Probably he's going to take, each heel will take 3 bumps from a punch. Then Hoot will, in his younger days, drop kick, shoot one off, fucking sleeper or cross body. That's a false finish. That brings the fucking other heel back for the save. 4-way. And it boom, boom, boom. Dump Ricky to the floor because he's the illegal guy. Stop Hoot from behind. Go for a fucking double vertical suplex on him. And that's where the booker would have said, during the heat, hit Ricky with a double vertical suplex. That way in the finish, they'll understand what you're going for. You go to double vertical suplex Robert. Ricky comes in from outside the ring and body blocks one of the Midnight Express out from under the double suplex. That causes the fucking imbalance of the goddamn weight. Gibson's feet go back down to the mat. He rolls the other heel up in the fucking jackknife 1, 2, 3, and the baby faces slide to the floor. So giving you the whole finish for the whole fucking 20-minute match, the booker said, shine him up, cut Ricky off, get some heat, give Hoot the hot tag, come back, false finish, 4-way, fucking dump Ricky to the floor, go for the double vertical suplex, he'll come back in, block Stan out, Hoot fucking small packages, Bobby 1, 2, 3, faces slide out, leave the ring, the heels to bitch. The rest of the 20 minutes was up to the fucking wrestlers. And I've seen Dusty Rhodes give Ric Flair a goddamn finish for him and whoever for a 45-minute match that took 30 seconds to impart. Because the booker is not the writer of the match. The booker is the football coach, and he's calling the play. And he's letting his talent, as Dutch Mantel always said, run the fucking play. So if the match doesn't make sense, or if it doesn't accomplish the point of what you're trying to do, it's the wrestler's fault because they didn't fucking put together the match right. And here's another thing. There's degrees of matches, which we've talked about, guys not knowing how to work with people of different standings. It's like modern guys, no matter if they're a main event guy, no matter who they're working with, they want to have the best match possible, even if it doesn't make a lick of fucking visual or mental sense for this top main event star to be taken to the limit for 20 minutes by this guy that never wins a match. Looks like shit. We've never heard of him just because he can. So there were different degrees of matches that a booker would, let's say you're in the territory days and in all days until recently, the heel called the match. Because most of the time, nobody had spoken to each other before they got in the ring, or if they did, it was minimal. And you never planned a match out ahead of time. You called it in front of the people as it happened, which is why it looked a little rougher around the edges, but more spontaneous and somewhat more credible. But the heel would call the match, except, again, if there was a giant mismatch. If Dusty Rhodes was in the ring against fucking Black Bart, Dusty was calling the match, right? But if the babyface star of the territory, Jerry Lawler, he always called his matches, even when he was a babyface. But again, who could do it better? Nobody. He was one of the best. But the heel generally, or heels in a tag team match, would call the match. So it was most important for the booker to get across to the heels what the fucking match was supposed to be, what was supposed to be accomplished out of it, what the point was that you're supposed to end up, who's supposed to go over, what thought are the fans supposed to be left with? Did we get an object over? Did we get a title over, a personal issue, further some guy, whatever the fuck. So there were degrees, and again, all the booker had to do was communicate the tone of what he wanted, and a good heel would then produce that match. If I'm the booker and I've got a top heel, and he's going to have a match against a baby face that we're just making up out of thin air, if I tell that heel, beat the fuck out of him and beat him, and it's a job match, a squash match, as the kids call it these days. He's in there with a job guy, and it's to showcase my heel and him to do all his stuff, makes him look like a badass, beat the fuck out of this guy and beat him. Or if I tell the heel, have a match and beat him, then that means that I don't want him to just treat the guy like a piece of shit. I want him to have a match with him and then beat him. And maybe the first time squash match is 4 minutes. Maybe this is 6 minutes. And that's another thing the heel the booker will tell is the time. And the heel will know, okay, in 4 minutes, he's a squash match. In 6 minutes, I got time to give the kid a couple spots. I'll miss something, let him fucking have some offense, cut him off, give him a little bit of a comeback, and I'll beat him with my finish. If I tell the heel, have a good match, and then beat him, that means I want him to have a good match. Because not all matches are supposed to be good. Have a good match and beat him means, well, you're going to get an extra minute or two, and let's get up and down. Let's let the kid show what he can do. And then you're still going to beat him. So that means it's going to be kind of competitive. If I tell the heel, have a real good match and fuck him, then that means that I want this heel to make this baby face look competitive, have an exciting match with him, and then because he's tried a time or two to beat him and it didn't work, he's going to have to cheat. He's going to have to fuck him, and then he's going to beat him. But he had to cheat because the baby face was that good. Or then if I say, have a great match with this kid and slip him over, then that means we're elevating this guy, and I want you to have a great competitive match with him and give the people plenty of doubt who's going to win and make the kid look real good, and then slip him over, as they used to say, and Vince McMahon hates that phrase, but it's widely used, which means that out of nowhere, some way, the babyface capitalizes on a heel mistake. He's in the right place at the right time. He's resourceful, and he fucking gets a win and slides out of that ring before the heel can get up and turn around and go, what the fuck, I'll kill you. That's slipping him over, but he won. And the people should be ready for that. And if the heel's giving him a good match, they will be. And on one of those, that's where you don't even give the heel a time. You just say, get it right, which used to be Dusty's favorite thing. He'd have a time for all the underneath matches, and he knew his last two, he'd just get it right, which means you guys go out and have this fucking match and get them where you want them to be and then take it home. It's up to you because I trust you. And then there's one more degree that I could tell that heel. We are bringing in, goddamn, this kid, this baby face, we want to make this kid. So have a great match and put him over flat in the fucking middle. And that's the last final fucking thing you can do, where this heel is going to have the best match he can have with this guy. And he's going to put over all the guy's shit, and he's going to fucking get some heat on him so the kid can sell. And then he's going to give the kid a big comeback. And in some way or another, that baby face coming out of nowhere is going to beat that top heel flat in the middle with his fucking finish 1, 2, 3. And if you had a goddamn competent heel and you had chosen his opponent fairly wisely, that's all you had to say to guys. And you got that match of 4 minutes or 8 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever the fuck it was. And yes, especially detail-oriented individuals like Bill Watts or Eddie Graham would give more complicated finishes, especially in big angles or in important matches. And I mean, that's the joke has been that, you know, Eddie Graham would spend 5 minutes telling you the finish, and part of it would be 3 drop kicks, and he'd watch the match. And if he only did 2, but everything else was perfect, you came back, he'd say, where was the 3rd drop kick? And Watts was the same way, but that was at the upper echelon of things on the big shows or the personal, the things that they were shepherding and overseeing and producing personally that the territory hung on. But the idea that the booker tells the wrestlers what foot to put in front of another, I didn't know was that prevalent that people thought that these days, young Brian.
Was that the question again? I mean, you went over a lot of different things, and at the end here, I was trying to remember what the question was.
Yes.
How could people be upset at wrestlers for a bad match? It's the booker's fault. Was that it?
Well, not for a bad match, not for their work being bad, like if they botched the moves, but if the match didn't make sense. If the match was, because we talk about this makes no sense. They're doing shit that makes no sense in the match. I get if the table doesn't break, it's the wrestler's fault. But if the guy puts the fucking wrestler through a table 2 minutes into the match and then they go another 20, that's the booker's fault. Of course, because they think that the booker controls everything you see, like the control voice on the Outer Limits. 1 foot in front of the other. And that's, like I said, maybe sometimes they do that these days, but no, now the wrestlers have always been the ones that control what happens in the ring. It's just that they used to call it as it was happening and it made sense. And now they dwell on it for days and weeks before the match happens. And the whole thing goes to hell logically in 5 minutes. But that is the wrestler's fault, not the booker.